Only about 36% of you guys are subscribed. I mean, a lot of you hit that subscribe button, ring that bell, and like. This is going over the lore before part 1 and 2 of Space D&D. It's been written almost a year ago from now, and it would mean a lot to me if you just sit through this video and watch. Enjoy! After a massive international incident, the UN meeting led to a radical terrorist group holding all countries' UN members hostage. The demands were simple: $100 billion for their release. The building was surrounded by police, and after a 4-hour negotiation, half of the nation's leaders of the world were all trying to find a peaceful resolution. However, on the 4th hour of the 44th minute, the army was sent in by the president's orders. The gunfire echoed through New York as a 4-hour siege took place. Terrorists exploded a gasoline bomb, killing all the hostages and turning the whole UN into nothing but a burning pile of ash and bodies. The US would be cut off from all other Western countries as the president didn't want to admit that he was wrong, and became more paranoid because of it. The next event we would have to go to is in Europe. In Europe, the Ukrainian war is still in stalemate. In Moscow, however, the news is hijacked with the message the war is over that plays. After an hour, the Russian state announces the president has been killed to the outside world. Many believe it's an inside job. At 9 p.m., a ceasefire is called for both sides on the front, and the EU negotiates for a peace conference in Switzerland. The news of the UN attacks in America shocked Europe to its core, and they decided to hold a meeting the next day. They decided the best course of action was to leave NATO and create their own defense group, the Virtue Front. The Virtue Front was made to ally all nations that held virtue and cultivated it. The US, China, and more nations that were turning or are dictator states are forbidden from joining. The Virtue Front, or VF for short, wanted to focus on protecting and cultivating these basic ideas: courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom. These beliefs would lead to true success in their eyes. The Virtue Front had a joining session with many UN nations and many NATO nations deciding to join. Most nations left NATO shortly after, and more nations that weren't a part of NATO but wanted to join soon rejoined the Virtue Front shortly after. The Virtue Front held out trials for other nations in developing countries, leading to a rise in countries joining the Virtue Front in Africa, Asia, and South America for developing nations. We're going to have to go back to Russia for a bit to see what happened to the end of the war. In the early morning, 6 a.m., the Russian state were announcing a draft for everyone else, men, women, and even children, because of the front lines. Police were marching on the streets, pulling people out of their houses. And after an old man was shot dead in the church for criticizing the government, the church killed the cop, dragged his body downtown, and paraded him around. A crowd of people joined in. At 7, the cops surrounded the crowd and tried to arrest him, but was overpowered by the sheer number. 44 civilians died, but all the cops were killed, overrun by the number of protesters. By now, the protesters decided to charge the Capitol, and after a fight, the president was thrown out the window and fell to his death, and was left there, with people cheering and celebrating. The state officials tried to call the army, but they were exhausted after the president killed many generals for questioning him. They decided to do nothing and call a ceasefire. The state army fell apart with the head gone. The state officials surrendered in the end of the Russian dictatorship. The people would come together and start making a government, while the Army, Air Force, and Navy would decide to martial law, taking over respective areas. The Navy took over the Baltic Sea, the Air Force took over the Caucasus, and the Army would take the land around the front line. Belarus would go into isolationism. With that done, we need to go to the US for some more lore. After NATO fell apart and the Virtue Front came about, the US president became more paranoid that the world was against him and started putting tariffs on all countries. He decided that the only way to stop the masses from going against him, like in Russia, was to use Executive 444, banning anything he deemed would hurt him. This included rights and items like books, guns, apps, television programs, gay sex, protests, sex, religion, drugs, love, government slander, opposing politicians, and opposite thought. In Boston, a protest organized on a college and marched onto a Monopoly building. The army was called to block the doors, and after a few minutes the protesters threw stones, then trash cans, and after a few minutes the protesters were haggling the army. The army, feeling threatened, took shots into the crowd, and it was one of the greatest massacres in American history, with 3,000 dead and another 2,000 injured. Congress tried to impeach the president, however he declared martial law and forbid any meetings to stop this. And after a paranoid breakdown, the president locked down the lighthouse for hours, as he called his rich friends to make him an AI companion to do nothing but be loyal. He would dub it Project Zeus. The AI would be trained on all government documents, and especially the military, wanting it to be a war expert as the president feared the army was turning against him. The president made himself ruler of the United States indefinitely. The press was taken over by the state as well as any other social media. The president created a new government body with himself at its center, and only the upper class were able to be appointed. The army was there to enforce his will, given the order to kill any opposition on sight unless they wanted to be killed. The rich oligarchy destroyed every single union worker. The president passed a bill that made it a crime of not obeying an oligarchy member will be punishable by death or forced labor. By this time, Zeus has been manipulating the president, and the vice president feels his power being zapped away, feeling like he's being kicked to the side. Zeus was gaining more and more control over the president as 2031 Doomsday was approaching. The president passed away 2031 on April 4th. The time between 2025 and 2031, the president oligarchy has been at each other's throats. In a twist of fate, the vice president, fearing that he would lose his place in the oligarchy to Zeus, decided the best outcome was to destroy everything, launching the nukes at China. The Chinese retaliated with their own. Southeast Asia and most of North America are wasteland, with the event triggering Yellowstone to explode, the eruption that moved radiation through all of North America and the world. The absurd amount of sulfuric acid would be ejected and have sunlight refracted back into space, enough to cool by 20 degrees. The explosion of Yellowstone and the nukes caused the magnetic field to shift, with just enough iron particles being put into the atmosphere. A nuclear winter and weaker magnetic field caused less protection from space's harmful radiation. Communication satellites in high orbit started to fall. The internet is disrupted, skin cancer increases, and multiple animals die to the environment. Many animals that used navigational skills from the magnetic fields are impaired, causing many to die. Many coastal cities are flooded and left in ruins, with only 800 million surviving after 1 decade. After Doomsday killed 70% on all life on Earth, the Virtue Front would survive and make a few efforts to start rebuilding, but everything would change after a scientist breakthrough in 2049. But before that, we need to go talk about the Pope. The Pope in a time of need would explore other nations to find answers to help the people who are left. In a small boat ride later, he would end up in Africa. He would end up in Ethiopia, and he would find it in ruins. And with help from the church, he would rebuild the country. And when he tried to leave, they blocked him from leaving, and after a little talk with the Vatican City, they allowed the Pope to rule over Ethiopia. And after a year, he decided to leave to Brazil to help rebuild it since it was in a similar state. After many days of hard work, he would practically rebuild the entire country of Brazil, as it was fractured into different mini micro-states after the Doomsday event. They would then crown a king of Brazil, and then a pope of Brazil. This king was a constitutional monarch and would lead Brazil into an age of prosperity through democracy. The Brazilian Pope and Ethiopian Pope would then become the three saints with the Pope from the Vatican City. They have yearly meetings to discuss the world's climate and events. A genius known as Amber Sunrise would make a mixture of oblique and grass with a special chemical mixture called Vistock. The grass would be hard on impact, not breaking under tons of force, and could shrink 30 times its size. A person could press their hands into it and shape it like putty. The virtue front would mass-produce oblique grass. Cities and towns were covered by these domes. Amber was hailed as a hero and created the Sunrise Science Team. Amber would make a breakthrough with toxic waste, able to turn nuclear waste from the war into energy through a machine she called Awa. Awa would be able to break down waste and turn it into gas that could power a car. Amber would make an effort to go to North America and Southeast Asia to take the nuclear waste and make it into power for the world. Amber would make a plan with the virtue front to start cleaning up North America and East Asia. After 15 years of hard work, both coastlines were able to be cleaned up and livable. North America and East Asia would be pretty good and well off together as the new settlers and refugees coming in would start rebuilding the communities and towns there. The Virtue Front would spend most time rebuilding the world, while the North American and Southeast Asia colonies would compete against each other, seeming to make the most scientific breakthroughs. In 2120, man would set foot on the moon after 148 years apart. In 2122, the first settlers would land on the moon with help from the Sunrise Science Team, which have created a spaceship to travel through space easily due to the fact that the magnetic field is weaker. It is easier to make newly designed ships that can travel safely and fuel efficiently to the moon and back. In 2129, the Pope of Ethiopia would crown Luke King of the Moon due to the fact that he's made many breakthroughs with science and spaceships. The Pope would, however, make him a constitutional monarch with checks and balances to make sure that democracy lived on in that state. The US would land on the moon in 2160 and set up settlers in 2177. They would make contact with an alien race living on Neptune. Neptunians come from a nearby galaxy. They landed on Neptune seen as prime real estate because of the ocean of liquid carbon and floating solid diamonds. Neptunians set up 3 settlements outside of Neptune because of the subsonic lens. Elos, the worker settlement that goes down and takes diamonds. Elo, the market settlement, it's more like a spaceship led by Captain Reginald. It's mainly for selling, it's like a marketplace. Ojo is the main settlement. Many Neptunians live here. It's their main base of operation. Keek was born on Elo market ship. Keek would spend most of his time buying and selling goods from his parents. Having a strengthened sense, he would avoid fights, but Keek would have been at a far range if he was in one. Keek's parents would have died on a mining run, and he would have been adopted by Captain Reginald, where he would meet his new 2 stepsisters, Tina and Shen. While passing by the moon, Keek would see the Lunarian mechs, and with a growing fascination for the outside world and exploration, he would join them. Born on the moon to a twin named Franz, Bradley was inspired to be like his father, a Lunarian mech soldier, while Franz was inspired to be like their mother, a Earth scientist from the Sunrise Team. When they grew up, Bradley and Franz would follow their parents' footsteps, with Bradley getting his father's mech on base. He would have his brother make changes to his weapons in honor, leading to the freezing blades of Bradley's lance. Franz would usually wimp out and get pushed around, seeking his brother to protect him, which he always did and always will. Flo Craze was born on Mars. He spent most of his time doing crazy stunts. At the age of 9, he burnt down his family's shed while jumping over at his dirt bike. Flo has almost no self-preservation whatsoever. On Earth, he fought an entire gang of thugs that were harassing a woman. This woman was named Cindy, and they would later fall in love and get married on Mars. He would, however, follow a career in Lunaria with a mech corps training program. He would make modifications of his own and strap a nuclear bomb from pre-war era into it. Monkeyfoot was born on Earth in the Virtue Front. He had a condition known as hands, where he would try to fight everyone he saw. At the age of 16, he joined the Lunarian Royal Guard simply because he wanted to throw metal hands. He would get his wish, getting his own mech, and was very quick to anger. He would soon become insane and believe there was some sort of space god king guy, when there clearly wasn't. Alrighty, thank you for watching, and you can go watch part 1 and then 2. I plan on doing part 3 soon, but probably won't release for another couple of months, so if you could please wait till then. And I'm happy to say that this is my first animation Annihilation of April, and I will be continuing to make animations and posting them every 5 days until the end of the month. I hope you all come to enjoy Animation Annihilation like I have. Enjoys the wrong word. I put myself through suffering. See you again in another 5 days. Goodbye, Pookies.